Almost every Saturday night, I have a dream about collective, and the dream is always about Sunday morning, and it goes like this. I show up to church knowing that I have to preach that day. And almost every time I have this dream, we're in a different building, right? One time our church met in an arena. One time we were outside. One time we were back at West Frederick Middle School where we launched. When I had the dream last night, because of course I did, I was like in a lecture hall. And what happens is while I'm walking to my office that morning, and whatever building my brain decides we are in, I realize that I haven't finished writing my sermon yet. And so I begin to panic. I run to my office. I start working as hard as I can to wrap it up before first service starts. Now, saying this out loud, I'm starting to realize this is probably more of a nightmare than a dream, because clearly this is a huge fear that I have. Okay, so in the nightmare that honestly I weekly have about you, I finished writing the sermon, but then when I try to print it out, guess what happens? It doesn't print. Like, why would it print? It's a dream or a nightmare, not sure. And so I can hear the band playing, but nothing is coming out of the printer. Then I hear the host telling you, fill out connection cards, and I look down, and there are just 2 pages. And so I grab what I can, and I run on stage fully unprepared to preach, and that's when I usually wake up. I spent some time this week looking at what the most common dreams are. Here are a few of the top 10. And actually, I want you to give a shout out if you have one of these dreams regularly. One of the top 10 dreams that people have are dreams about missing teeth. Yeah, that's weird. Like, do you wake up and you're talking without teeth? Like, I just don't understand. That's also not a dream, that's a nightmare. Here's another one of the most common dreams, falling. And if you still have those, yeah, I had those a lot when I was a kid, a little bit less now. Here's one, being chased by people, by animals, by objects, like random staplers, like chasing you through your dreams. You're working too much. Here's one that I'd never heard of before, but I'm kind of becoming obsessed with it. Some of you have dreams that you are going nowhere in slow motion, right? Everything you do is just as slow. That is off. I feel like that's when I'm driving and I like freak out. Here's another one, really regular, flying. Any of you still have those dreams? Or do any of you have the dream that I have regularly, which is the top 10, which is feeling unprepared for something important, right? These are dreams that we have. And so today is the last Sunday in our series called Bloodstained Pews. And this series has been all about us choosing to be real. We've talked about some heavy topics. We've talked about family and sin. We've talked about growth. We've talked about pain and suffering. And we've talked about mental health. And we're talking about these things because we want Collective to be a place where you can bleed and where you can heal. Right? Where it doesn't matter what you've been through. It doesn't matter what mistakes you've made in your past. It doesn't matter what you're dealing with right now. You can be real about your brokenness and how Jesus is working in your life. But in order for Collective to be that type of church, we have to be real. Right? We have to be honest. We have to be vulnerable. And as we wrap up this series this morning, we're going to talk about your dreams. And I don't mean the dreams that you have when you're asleep that you can't control. We're going to talk about the dreams you have when you are awake. Since starting Collective, I've come to realize that one of the most vulnerable things we can do is share our dreams. Because it is really scary to tell other people about our dreams for the future. It's scary to share our hopes and our desires and our goals with other people. And I don't really know why we are scared to tell other people about our dream about getting sober. I don't know why we are afraid to tell our friends about breaking generational pain in our families. I don't know why we are afraid to tell other people that we want to put God first in our marriage. But the reality is we have these things that we are scared to say out loud, and they just grip us. Right? These are dreams to have an impact, to achieve, to connect, and to love well. Maybe we're afraid to share them because we're afraid we will look dumb. Maybe we're afraid that if we share them and we try to accomplish them, we'll fail. One of the things I think is true is I think we're afraid to share them because if we say them out loud, we might actually have to try to achieve them. But I believe there is something about putting a God-given dream out there and running after it that requires deep vulnerability that we have to be real about. So here's what we're going to do this morning. I'm going to read a story, and I'm going to share a couple lessons from this story. And I'm going to give you one big application, how we can apply it to our lives. Here's today's scripture. It starts in Genesis 37. It says this. This is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks. He worked for his half-brothers, but Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. Classic little brother, right? Joseph is the second youngest of 12, and he is a narc. Shout out to little brothers who kept telling on your siblings so you could remain the favorite. That is Joseph. In fact, it says this in verse 3. It says, Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. Now, some translations actually say that it was a beautiful multicolor robe. In Joseph's day, dyed fabric was expensive, so the most expensive type of garment you could give to someone was one with multiple dyed fabrics in it. And that is the type of robe that we believe Jacob gave to his son Joseph, one that was very special and very unique and very rare. One night, Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly, my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. My youngest daughter, Harper, loves to tell us about her dreams, but most of the time, when she explains them, they make absolutely no sense. But a few weeks ago, I woke her up for school, and without even getting a good morning, she said, Dad, I had a dream that you were eaten by a bear. And then she just started laughing. And I just sat there. I was like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, is this your subconscious, attacking me? Like, do you wish I was dead? I couldn't quite figure it out. But I imagine that's what it felt like to be Joseph's brothers. Right? Joseph runs up to him. He says, hey, guys, let me tell you about this really cool dream I had. I was your king, and you all bowed down to me. That's crazy, right? His brothers responded, so you think you will be our king, do you? Do you actually think you will reign over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way that he talked about them. Now, if you ever wanted to learn how to make all of your siblings hate you, Joseph is the prime example of this right now. But it actually continues. In verse 9, it says, soon Joseph had another dream. And again, he told his brothers about it. Listen, I have had another dream, he said. He's not reading the room very well. He says, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me. This time he told the dream to his father as well as to his brothers, but his father scolded him. What kind of dream is that, he asked. Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow to the ground before you? But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dream meant. And we're going to pause the story here for a second. Here's the first lesson about dreams. Dreams make me different. Right? Dreams make me different. When God gives you a dream, you are set apart. Right? It's because God has something unique for you. And this is a really important part of this story. It was Joseph's dream. This wasn't some generic dream that anyone else could fulfill. And Joseph didn't go and tell his brothers hoping they would take his dream and run after it so he didn't have to. Right? In this story, Joseph had a dream and his siblings didn't, because it was a dream that God had for Joseph. Right? And Joseph knew this was from God. Right? He knew it made him different, and so he talked about it. Because when you have a God-given dream, you can't stay silent. Now, maybe Joseph could have had a little more tact when telling his family about his dreams. There's probably some humility he needed to learn. But he was set apart. Right? He was different, and he knew it. Right? He accepted this truth. He didn't care what anybody else thought about him, including his own parents. Right? Because if you have a God-given dream, it will make you different. And that is okay. Now, Joseph's brothers began to hate him. They hated his coat. They hated his dreams. And so one day, they decided to sell him into slavery. And what they did is they took his robe and they tore it up and they gave it to their father, and they told him that Joseph was attacked and killed by a wild animal. And so in the story, Joseph was rejected by his family. He was sold into slavery and taken to Egypt. Then as the story continues, he's actually accused of rape falsely and thrown in prison. And while in prison, he makes this connection with the Pharaoh's cupbearer, and he starts to believe that he's going to eventually one day get out of prison because of this relationship. But check out what happens in Joseph's story. This is probably the most depressing verse in all of it about him. Genesis 40, verse 23 says, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. Right? And so Joseph is in prison, he is rejected, and he's forgotten. Right? And can't you just imagine him sitting in his prison cell thinking, what was the point of that dream? Right? When is this dream going to happen? When is this dream going to come true? And so here's the second lesson from this story. Dreams come with pain. Dreams come with pain. Now, sometimes the pain can be physical. Joseph was in chains in prison. Sometimes the pain can be emotional. Right? He was rejected and sold as a slave by his family. Sometimes, though, the pain is in the waiting. Joseph had these incredible dreams, but nothing was happening because dreams come with pain. And I know that we don't like that lesson because if we are being honest, we don't like pain. But for those of you who have accomplished any of the big dreams you have ever had, on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard was it? It was probably a 10, right? 9.5. Because the dream was to start a family, but then came the struggles with infertility or miscarriages. The dream was to get a degree, but then came the debt or the moving away from home and feeling homesick or the working a full-time job during the day and staying up all night to study. The dream was to get healthy, right? It was to get in shape, but that came with the pain of working out, the pain of being disciplined when you didn't really feel like it, and the pain of setting boundaries. Dreams come with pain. I would even argue to say that if your dreams don't come with pain, your dreams probably aren't big enough. Now, later in the story, Joseph is brought to Pharaoh to interpret a dream for the Pharaoh. And after hearing about the dream, Joseph tells the Pharaoh that what it means is that there's a famine coming that's going to destroy Egypt unless they start preparing for it now. And the Pharaoh is so impressed by Joseph that he puts him in charge of all the food. This actually means Joseph gets put second in command in all of Egypt. But Joseph's job is to track grain. That's it. I know some of you work jobs and you use Excel spreadsheets and you love Excel spreadsheets, right? I know that some of you go home and you tell your husband and your wife and you brag about the pivot table that you created during the week or the formula you wrote. I know that many of you are just huge nerds, right? And that's okay. But that was essentially Joseph's job. He had to keep track of grain forever. And so here's the third lesson from this story. Dreams are never as sexy as I imagine they will be. Yep, dreams are never as sexy as I imagine they will be. If we look ahead in the story, the famine reaches Joseph's family a few hundred miles away, and so they come to Egypt seeking help. Right? This means that Joseph's brothers end up standing before Joseph begging for food. Now, they don't recognize him because he's dressed like an Egyptian, he's speaking Egyptian, and really they probably thought he was dead. But if you think back to Joseph's original dreams, they are coming true. Right now, Joseph controls whether or not his brothers starve to death. And so before giving him the food, he actually tests them to see, have they changed? Right? It's been many years, have they changed at all? And so Joseph asks knowingly if they have a younger brother, which he knows that they do. His name was Benjamin. He says, I need to see this younger brother before I give you any grain. And so his brothers head home, they grab Benjamin, they bring him back to Egypt. Then Joseph actually tries to convince his brothers to ditch Benjamin the way they ditched him years before. But they won't do it. In fact, they offer to give their lives instead of his. And this leads to Joseph revealing himself to his brothers. He is so overcome with emotion that Scripture says that the attendants in the other room could hear him wailing. See, dreams sound fun, but they are actually difficult. In his book, The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership, Dr. Stephen Sample wrote about when he became the president of Indiana University. This was his dream. He wanted to be the president of a big college, so when he finally achieved it, there was a huge ceremony. And after the ceremony, he's walking across campus when a crusty old professor who had been at IU forever approached him and said, Dr. Sample, congratulations on being named president. What a great honor. And Sample said, thank you. But then the professor said, let me give you some advice. Everybody wants to be president, but not everybody wants to do president. And Stephen Sample said that in the years that followed, he thought about that a lot. Because everybody wants the title of president and the president's office and the president's salary and the president's use of the private plane. But not everybody wants to travel the majority of the year trying to raise billions of dollars. Not everybody wants to be the spokesperson when something goes wrong at a university. Not everybody at every event they go to wants to shake the hand of every person so they can maintain good relationships with them. You see, dreams are never as sexy as I imagine they'll be. Now, I want to give you one more lesson from this story, and I think this is the most important one. After Joseph and his brothers reconcile their relationships, Joseph's whole family moves to Egypt so they can be taken care of. And then when Jacob, their father, dies, the brothers begin to freak out because they're afraid that this is when Joseph's going to seek his revenge. And so they go to Joseph and they say, promise that you aren't going to kill us. And this is the most powerful part of the story in Genesis 50. It says this, but Joseph replied, don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so that I could save the lives of many people. You see, at the beginning of this story, Joseph thought this dream was about him. But by the end of this story, he realizes this dream was about God. And so here's the fourth lesson about dreams. Dreams are about God, not me. Dreams are about God, not me. And see, today is not, and I hope you don't misunderstand this, today is not, what is your fantasy, go chase it. Right? Today is not, whatever that selfish thing you want to do, you go after it and God will bless it. That's not what we're talking about. Today is, do you desire to be used by God? Is there this holy discontent in you that longs for something better? Right? Do you have a dream of going into full-time ministry? Do you have the dream of having children and raising them to be godly world changers? Do you have a dream that people approach you in 40 years and they say, we can see that Jesus is the center of your marriage. Will you mentor us because we want that too? Right? Do you have dreams of baptizing people you love? Because dreams are about God, not me. Like I said earlier, there are a few lessons, but here's the application. And I want to give you a chance to respond to this. And so here's the final takeaway, the action step when it comes to dreams. I've got to share it. Right? You have to share your dreams. You have to tell someone about the dream that God has placed on your heart. Right? And that's the vulnerable part. Right? The lessons aren't the vulnerable part. The application is. This is the real part. If God has placed a dream on your heart, what is that dream? Right? The scary one. The challenging one, the one that you know that there's pain attached to it. You have to share those dreams. And so here's what I want you to do. I want you to email me your dream because I want to know what your dream is. Right now, this isn't so that I can be your personal accountability partner. Like I'm not doing that for you. Find other people to do that. Right? This also isn't so you can tell me what you think Collective should do or what Collective's dream should be. I'll delete those emails immediately. Actually, Holly, my assistant, she's meaner than I am. She'll delete those emails. Also, for those of you who think you're funny, I also don't want your weird teeth dreams. Don't send those to me either. Really what it is, I just want to pray for you and the dreams that God has placed inside of you. And I know that some of you are struggling with this morning because you don't feel like you have this God-sized, God-given dream pressing on your soul right now. And I actually heard a story by Dave Harvey that might explain why. Dave was having all kinds of sleep problems, so he did a sleep study, and it revealed that he had sleep apnea. And so it was waking him up multiple times a night. And so the doctor performed a surgery to remove Dave's uvula, and the result was he was able to sleep through the night again. But there's a side benefit as well. See, Dave hadn't dreamt in years, and after his surgery, he began to dream again. Once the thing that was preventing him from sleeping was removed, he got his dreams back. So here's what I believe. I believe that some of you don't have this God-given, God-sized dream because there's something in the way. And I believe that something is sin. Right? I believe that unforgiveness is blocking you. I believe selfishness is blocking you. I believe that choosing your way over God's is blocking you from those dreams. And so in order for you to get those dreams back, you have to deal with your sin. Right? You need to repent, which means to turn away from the way that you're living, and you need to let Jesus make you new again. And the way we celebrate that at Collective is baptism. Right, we got to celebrate that at first service with Stacy. And what she was saying is, with my mind and my heart and my action, I'm turning toward God and giving him control of my life. Right, Jesus promises he will take away the guilt of your sin. He promises he will give you grace and endless second chances. And I believe that he'll also put this God-sized, God-given dream on your heart. But if you know what your dream is, and you've been ignoring it for a really long time, it's time to say it out loud. One dream I heard about while preparing for this sermon was from Albert Einstein. Legend has it that Einstein once had a dream where he was sledding so fast that he was approaching the speed of light, and all the stars in his dream were changing color around him. And when he woke up, he realized he just had to figure out this dream. And so he chased that dream his entire life. What dream does God have for you? Right, maybe you have young kids and you want to lead them in their faith and baptize them one day. Maybe you have the dream of starting a business or a nonprofit that truly impacts our community. Maybe it's to be the first person in your family to have a faithful marriage. Maybe your dream is to get a degree or to adopt or to impact public schools. Maybe your dream is to give away $1 million. Right? Maybe your dream is just to finish well. Whatever it is, I want to encourage you to share it with me. I want to pray for you. And really, I want to start by praying for our dreams right now. So will you pray with me? God, I think most of us know what dream you've put on our heart. It's the thing we think about when we're not distracted by this world, or it's the thing we think about when we feel peace, and it's this thing that you've pressed on us, that you're trying to encourage us and convince us and push us to live out, and it terrifies us. God, and it terrifies us so much that we haven't ever said it out loud, even to the people that we're close to, because we know if we say it out loud, we might have to chase after it. But God, one thing that we know is true is that you give us these God-sized dreams because you just want more. God, you want more for us, you want more for the city, you want more for this church, and there are dreams that we have to live out to accomplish that. And so God, I just pray for those here that know what that is. God, that today is a day that they feel encouraged, not afraid, to share it, to say it out loud, and to start chasing after it. God, because what would this church look like? What would Frederick look like? What would our marriages look like? What would mental health look like if we chase after the dreams you put on our heart? God, for those who don't feel that, God, who feel like something's in the way, I pray today is a day where they turn back to you. God, where they get rid of the thing that is blocking them from trusting you enough to hear this dream and chase after it. God, we thank you for dreams. God, we thank you that they're not about us and they're about you. God, give us the courage to pursue those. We love you and praise you in your name. Amen. So in this series, we have said that our goal is to be a church of bloodstained pews. And this was inspired by what happened on D-Day in France. Robert Wright and Kenneth Moore made a 900-year-old church an aid station. And through the night, they risked their own lives to bring back wounded soldiers into the church. And they used pews as makeshift beds, treating over 80 men who had been injured in battle in just under 24 hours. After the war, as the town was rebuilt, they left the bloodstained pews alone forever to serve as a memorial to those who fought and bled there. And these bloodstained pews are some of the best images I've ever seen of the church, reminding people that the church is where we can bleed and where we can heal. And Collective, we will always be a church of bloodstained pews. We will never stop being the church where people can bleed, where people know that regardless of race, sex, age, religious background, education, financial status, this is a place where they can be real about their brokenness. This is a place where they don't have to pretend like everything is okay. This is a place where they can get grace and truth. But here's the thing. It starts with you. And so here's what we're going to do to close things out this morning and to close out this series. Up front, we have 2 pews. And And in just a moment, we're going to take communion. Communion is the reminder that God sent his son, Jesus, to live a perfect life, to shed his own blood, to die on a cross for our sins. Then he was buried in a tomb and resurrected 3 days later, proving that he was the Son of God, proving that there is grace and forgiveness and that we can be made new. And then after communion, the band is going to come up and they're going to lead us in 2 songs. And what we want you to do and what I encourage you to do is to come down front, grab a marker, and write something on one of these pews. And we want you to finish this phrase, I'm going to be real about. I'm going to be real about. What you need to write down is the thing that God has been pressing on your heart over the past few weeks. We want you to use one word or just a few words and write them on a pew. At the culmination of this journey, what do you need to be real about going forward? It could be what we've talked about in this series. It could be your family or your mental health, your pain. It could be your sin. It could be the ongoing addiction or struggle that you have. It could be that one-time trauma that you've been trying to bury for years. It could be a fear. It just needs to be something that you know you need to express. Right? And this is an action step for you to say, God, this is my commitment. I'm writing it down so that going forward, I will be real about this. So right now, we're going to move into a time of communion. There's a cup on the back of the seat in front of you, and you can take it whenever you're ready. And when the band starts to play and asks you to stand, whenever you are ready, you can come up front and share what you are ready to be real about. If you go to Engleville, France today, the Church of the Bloodstained Pews is still there, but it's not a church anymore. And there are no members. You don't hear people worshiping. They're not celebrating communion. They're not baptizing people because it's no longer a church. It's a museum. And they raise money and they sell things to honor what happened there on D-Day. But it kind of breaks my heart a little bit to know that the church is no longer living out the mission that was created to live out. It's no longer a church of bloodstained pews today. It's a church of what was of bloodstained pews. When I think about collective, I don't want that for our church. And I don't think you do either. And so it is our responsibility to continue to live out the mission of the church. To continue to be a church that is real and honest and vulnerable. It's to continue to go out into this broken world and tell as many people as possible that there is hope and there is healing, that there is grace and truth, and that we can be made new, and that only happens through Jesus. But that starts when we are real, when we're vulnerable. Collective, you are that church. You are those people. And we wrote these things down on these pews not to be a memorial for a series that was, but to talk about our future. Right? This is who we are, and this is who we will always be. But it starts with us. So I pray that we continue to live that out, that we go out in this world and we are real about our brokenness and what Jesus is doing in our lives. So collective, thank you for being that church, but thank you for continuing to be that church. So let's go live that out. Collective, thank you so much. Have a great Sunday. We'll see you next week.